Today we're going to dig into a really fascinating idea. What if some of the biggest, most stubborn problems in our society aren't really failures of morals or even money, but failures of design? This is Policy by Design: Why Good Intentions Fail.
We all see it. Those recurring issues on the news, problems that just seem completely stuck, super expensive, and honestly, pretty chaotic. It's so easy to just shrug and assume, well, that's just how it is, right? That every country just ends up in the same kind of mess.
But what if that's completely the wrong way to look at it? What if these aren't just unavoidable messes, but the totally predictable results of very specific choices? That's the core idea we're exploring today. Maybe the problem isn't the human behavior itself, but the design of the system we built to deal with it.
So, how do we end up with such wildly different results in different places? Well, when you actually compare different countries, you find that the real difference isn't in human nature. People are kind of the same everywhere. The real difference is what governments assume about human nature, and it all boils down to two core assumptions.
And right here, this is the hidden mechanism that drives everything. On one side, you have policies built on this assumption of elimination, the idea that if you just apply enough pressure, enough punishment, enough shame, a behavior will just go away. But on the other side, you have policies that start from a completely different place, that the behavior is probably going to stick around, so the real goal should be to manage it and reduce all the harm that comes with it. This one single difference in philosophy, well, it changes absolutely everything.
Okay, so let's see how this actually plays out in the real world. We're going to look at 3 examples where these two competing ideas lead to dramatically different places: drugs, sex work, and migration.
Let's start with drugs, because it's one of the most studied and clearest comparisons you can find. Starting back in the 60s, basically all Western countries saw a rise in drug use. They all faced a similar challenge, but their responses couldn't have been more different.
So on one side, you have a model like the one in the US, which went all in on criminalization and enforcement. The goal was pretty clear: elimination. On the other side, you have Portugal's approach. They decriminalized users and poured resources into treatment and harm reduction. Their goal was management.
And here is the absolute key. Drug use didn't just magically vanish in Portugal, and it sure didn't vanish in the US. The behavior continued. But what did change, and changed dramatically, were the outcomes. In Portugal, overdose deaths, HIV transmission, and incarceration rates all just plummeted, and it became way easier for people to get help because the system was designed to actually manage the harm.
So you see, the core behavior itself, it stuck around in both places.
But you had one system that chose punishment and another that chose management.
And that one design choice led to profoundly different levels of harm and totally different costs. Okay, let's look at case study number 2, sex work. With this one, the design choice often boils down to this: are we going to treat this as a moral issue that we have to eliminate, or as a labor and safety issue that we need to manage?
And the results of that choice are just so stark. When you criminalize sex work, the data shows it doesn't just disappear, it gets pushed underground into the shadows. And that makes workers so much more vulnerable to violence and exploitation. But in places like New Zealand, where it's treated as regulated work, the industry becomes visible. And that visibility means you can inspect conditions, and it makes it way, way easier to spot and reduce harm.
So once again, the activity itself, it happens under both systems.
But one design forces it into the darkness, while the other brings it into the light.
And the result is just a massive difference in safety and vulnerability for the people involved.
All right, our final case study, migration, is maybe the clearest example of a policy's stated goals just slamming right into reality. I mean, most countries say they want controlled migration. But what does that word control actually mean when you put it into practice? Well, on one path, you've got deterrence through hostility. Take the UK, for example. They tightened the legal routes for work. But the demand for labor in places like farms and care homes didn't just evaporate. So the work just shifted into the informal economy, creating a system that's opaque and chaotic. Then you have the other path. Countries like Canada and Spain created managed, legal pathways. Now, this didn't stop migration, but it made it visible, taxable, and governable. It produced order.
Because the fundamental reason this is all happening, the demand for workers on one side and the desire for people to move on the other, that doesn't just go away when you change the rules. So the real outcome wasn't a choice between migration or no migration. It was a design choice between creating a system that's governable or one that is completely ungovernable.
So across these very different issues, you start to see this really clear pattern emerge. Let's just break down the logic that seems to repeat itself time and time again.
This is the predictable cycle. First, a policy that's all about elimination and punishment. It doesn't stop the behavior, it just hides it. Second, that now hidden behavior concentrates all the risk. It gets more dangerous and way harder to monitor. And finally, that concentrated risk creates these massive long-term costs in healthcare, in policing, in social services that just spiral way beyond whatever the original budget was.
And this brings us to the final and most crucial takeaway. Understanding this pattern is just so important because it totally reframes the whole conversation away from simple arguments about funding.
Let's just let that sink in for a second. If we can see that one design philosophy consistently leads to more harm and higher costs, then those outcomes, well, they're not accidents anymore, are they? They're the direct, predictable result of the system we chose to build. The cost becomes a feature of the design, not a bug.
So this leaves us with a really uncomfortable question. If policies that are designed for management and harm reduction are clearly less costly and create less harm, why do so many systems still default to designs based on elimination and punishment? Well, that's a question about politics and ideology and arithmetic. Thanks for watching.